Welcome to Lumient Live. I'm your host, Mark Ackroyd. Lumient Live is the podcast for advice professionals that believe in a values-based advice experience, but still have that question, how does it all work? We connect listeners with other advice professionals to hear best practice client stories or business examples and lift the lid on how they made it happen. Now, on to today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Lumient Live. Today I'm joined by Matt Brinker from Merchant. G'day, Matt. Nice to have you.
Thanks, Mark. It's good to see you, man. How you been?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, mate. Really good. Recording here today live from Chicago, and we've got you over on the West Coast in LA or just outside of LA?
Newport Beach.
Newport Beach,
which is just a little south of Los Angeles by about 60 miles.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Well, good to have you on board, Matt. This is going to be a really cracking conversation for us here, a little bit different sort of episode and content to what we've had. So let me roll into your bio, and then we'll have a bit of a chat, and it'll start to make a bit of sense for our audience here. So for those that don't know Matt Brinker, Matt's a managing partner focused on evaluating new investment opportunities for Merchant and helping partner firms work through strategic and operational initiatives for growth and scale. Before working at Merchant, Matt was a chief business development officer and head of acquisitions for United Capital, where he and his partners grew assets from $300 million to $25 billion. Matt was responsible for United's acquisition strategy, that's a hard word, which led to 90 transactions over 15 years. And additionally, Matt launched and grew United's wealth tech platform, growing assets to 23 billion AUM before United was purchased by Goldman Sachs in 2019. Matt's an investor and board member for several wealth tech companies, one of which is Lumient. So it probably makes a bit of sense as to why we've got Matt on. But outside of all that amazing work stuff that Matt does, he lives in Newport Beach, which we've covered, with his wife and 2 children. And he's passionate about backcountry skiing, surfing, and endurance races, as he is about working with founders and fellow entrepreneurs. So, Matt, it's an impressive bio, and it sort of should start to click for our group today while we've got you on, because some of the stats and what you're able to achieve at United and what you're doing at Merchant around identifying growth opportunities, helping businesses maximize their business value is what we're going to end up talking about. But outside of your bio, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Merchant.
Well, yeah, so thanks for the intro. It's good to be here, Mark. Look, for the way that we think about how we invest in Merchant is that we're really truly investing in independence. And my former firm, we bought 100% stakes in firms, and they integrated fully, and we're effectively W-2 employees, went from entrepreneurs to W-2 employees, and you see a lot of behavioral changes in when people go from owning their firms to not owning their firms. And so Merchant is very much focused in being a minority investor in firms where the majority of the equity and thus the outcome is left to the founders and the entrepreneurs. And so we also think of ourselves as operators who happen to be investors versus just people who invest in wealth management. And it's a very important distinguishing characteristic about us and what we do in terms of how we approach our partner firms, meaning that we know what it's like to build and scale wealth management businesses. Me and my partners have operated in the wealth management space across the spectrum, from startups to running some of the biggest banks in the world, like Goldman Sachs. So we bring what we hope is a lot of interesting things to bear to our partners, and so it's been a ton of fun. We've invested in 63 wealth management firms here. It's about north of 140 billion of AUM. We've started to expand internationally, which has been really fun, in Brazil and Switzerland, and looking to expand further in other markets.
Yeah, it's really impressive, mate. And I think it sets a really good tone for what we're going to discuss today, because just going through your expertise, the work you do at Merchant, the work you used to do at United Capital, it's probably fair to say you've seen your fair share of impressive and maybe not so impressive advice businesses when you're looking to invest in them. So, when we go to start talking about what you look for in a strong business before you invest, and the impact things like a great client experience have on a good advice business valuation, it'll probably make sense to everyone that you've got a fair chunk of experience as to what's worked and what hasn't. So if we launch straight into it, Matt, um, tell us a little bit about. Let's start really high level here. When you're looking at a business and assessing its value and trying to figure out, is it a good business to invest in from a financial advice perspective? What is it that you look out for? Let's start there.
Yeah, for us, I mean, it's the financials for these businesses are relatively straightforward. There's just not a lot of complexity in the cap tables and the P&Ls, the income statements, and the balance sheet. There's just not a lot of complexity in these businesses, which makes the assessment of them relatively easy through a qualitative or through a quantitative lens. And so, we're really more interested in the quality of the leadership, and the quality is a pretty broad frame, but this really comes down to the underlying vision of the founder or the CEO. How they think about the future of wealth management. Are they, wholly obsessed by, making sure that the client experience is just exceptional, that they're dedicated to developing the next generation of advisors, that they're thoughtful about the career development of their team, how they think about branding and marketing, how they think about the combination of growing organically and being mindful of the sort of the opportunity cost and the client acquisition cost measured against growing through acquisitions. And so it really is all that sort of boils down to a really good person who's dedicated to the business, and is focused on growth and constant improvement within their personal lives and also their careers. And we've been very fortunate that most of our partner firms fit squarely into those categories. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool way to look at it. Just investing in good people, right? Good people equals good business. I assume, I've never been on the investment side or the investor side of a business, but I assume you could get lulled in sometimes into that false sense of what financially looks like a good business, but may not have good people behind it.
Yeah.
Because you only got to look as far as Australia. We've gone through the Royal Commission. There's a history potentially in our industry of not necessarily doing good by doing good, for lack of a better term. So
Right.
how do you assess that? What is it that you look for within a good founder and a good business? You mentioned obviously the high level stuff, but do you go through an interview process? Are you looking
Sure.
through the numbers? Talk to us a little bit about that. How do you test if they're a good person?
Yeah, it's I have this belief that there's a sort of a mean regression to who you truly are if you spend enough time with somebody. Like, if I spend an hour with you and I can pretend to be a really good guy for an hour. I can pretend to be a really good guy for maybe 4 or 5 hours. But man, you spend enough time with somebody, inevitably there's that you're gonna get to who the essence of this. So we'd like to spend a lot of time with our potential partners, And I mean, like, there's little small tells, like how do you treat a waiter at dinner, right? Like, staff turnover is an incredibly important tell, right? To high staff turnover is indicative of several things that may be broken with the culture of the firm. So we do a pretty good job of really sort of measuring for culture, and it's culture is so often so talked about in our industry and how important it is, and but in the same breath, it's incredibly difficult to define. And to me, culture is just a microcosm of multiple actions. Like, literally, like, do you take the Keurig cup out of the Keurig coffee holder when you're done? Like, that is a microcosm of culture. And I always tell my kids, how you tie your shoes is how you're going to run your life. And they're like, what in goodness gracious are you talking about? You know what I mean? It's like one of those dadisms where, it's just like, but it's just sort of the things that we do at the smallest scale sort of can extrapolate out to the bigger picture, and I think that's very true with culture. And bad culture is very hard to hide. It's very hard to hide, and but it's also pretty nuanced. But if you know what you're looking for, it's super easy to identify.
Yeah. It's you can spot bad culture just by scratching under the surface, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's a really heartening way to look at it, and it probably gives us a really good segue or pivot into what we really want to get into today, which is the impact a great client experience would have on business valuations and how you assess a business. You've mentioned already, you look for things like the vision of the founder and CEO, that they're giving back to the next generation, or they're developing the next generation, and developing people's careers. They've got good branding and marketing. They're growing organically. All of those, in our biased opinion here at Lumion, would be reflections of a good client experience. But maybe let's take it from your perspective. When you're looking at a business and you're looking at their client experience, what is it that it tells you, and what is it that you're looking for, and how does it play into the overall business valuation?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's without a client experience, there's no business. You're right, because what we're paid for effectively is what our clients experience. And the client experience can be so immensely broad, from an incredibly expensive wrap of ETFs that you can buy from Wealthfront for 25 basis points that you're charging 125 basis points, to something as completely holistic and robust, and something that completely encompasses the client across not only their pure financial needs, but also the things that truly matter to their lives and their family lives around their values and their financial values. And so the financial experience is obviously a very wide and broad spectrum. And you start diving into and looking at the firms that are, whether it's measured in net promoter score, whether it's measured in percentage of wallet, the total AUM and net worth of the client, the rate at which clients are referring, which obviously reflects in overall, just the overall growth rate of the business, can be tied to one singular thing, and that's the client experience. And there's a clear delineation of firms that are growing, and firms that are growing and that are not growing. And if you go really and dive into and study the firms that are growing, the common theme in that is truly an obsession on the client experience, which most of what we're seeing and most of what I'm seeing is that it's truly an expansion of services that go well beyond, kind of, even if you kind of rewind the tape 20 years ago, 15 years ago, holistic wealth planning was just a bit of sort of the cutting edge client experience. And now, so many firms have leaped so far in surrounding the client with estate and tax solutions. And as you're sort of seeing this now focus, and I think I read literally something just the other day that actually I need to share with you all around just the focus on behavior and values, and the clients wanting to engage with their financial advisors in that capacity. I had the luxury of having front row seats to watching how the behavioral finance digital engagement process that we built at my old firm had, a transformational impact on not only the businesses that were running the system, but the lives of the people that went through this experience. And what we found was, these were clients that had 15, 20 plus years relationships with our advisors in these firms. And, anecdotally, and this is what just would fire me out of bed every morning, was hearing the advisor say, I ran my clients through this client experience, and I learned things about them that I had no idea. And these were advisors that had deep, long relationships with clients, and they were, through this process, they were able to sort of unpack and understand really what was going in their financial lives and why they, more importantly, were behaving a certain way. Because if you think about, how do clients impact their financial outcome? It isn't necessarily, earning a greater, higher return or making more money or saving more money. Those things matter. But where we can make transformational impact on clients' lives is in changing their behavior, right? Changing how they perform, how they think about money, how they interact with money, how they engage with their spouses and their family around money, is where I think we as an industry have so much room to improve on and so much opportunity in front of us to truly transform clients' lives. And so I had the pleasure of having front row seats of watching that happen. And then, another sort of interesting anecdotal part to this, and we really focused on this, and I know Lumien's doing the same, which is, oftentimes there's there's somebody in the relationship where they don't have a strong financial voice or advocate in the room to talk about the things that are happening through their lens in their financial lives, right? Because oftentimes it's, this is my client and his wife, right? And I've heard that introduction a handful of times, and I think we all know the stats, right? Like, 72% of women are firing their advisor the minute their husband passes, and the amount of money that women are going to control, and those people that aren't typically engaged with tend to be women, generally speaking. And if we're not having meaningful conversations with them beyond literally Greek, right? Like literally Sharpe ratio and beta, and typically the clients are like, oh yeah, Sharpe ratio bad, and there they are, Investopedia, Google searching Sharpe ratio. What the heck is Sharpe ratio, right? And
yeah. And they know the Greek alphabet through alpha and beta.
Yeah, spot on, exactly right. So anyway, it's a long-winded answer to your question.
I like it. Hey, Lumien Live's a place for long-winded answers, so don't ever feel the need to apologize for that. It's you're in a safe space here. I give long-winded questions, so it feels like an appropriate response.
Thank
You
you.
mentioned a couple of things in there that I'd love to unpack a little bit. Let's start with the non-financial spouse. And I love the statement you started with when you launched into that, which is typically you hear from advisors, here's my client, and then here's his wife. What does that, when you hear that, what does that tell you, or what impact might that have on how you view their business as a potential investor?
Dated,
Yeah, right.
antiquated, undoubtedly. Like, and I think that it's dangerous to sort of extrapolate on an anecdotal
Yeah,
example into the broader industry. And um, I think you are seeing younger led firms being very mindful of not only the generational differences in terms of how clients want to engage, but also across also across genders too as well. And I think again, I mean, it all, you can't hide. You can't hide in you can't hide the numbers, right? Like it all sort of manifests itself and articulates itself somewhere in the numbers, where, like I said, if you're not growing, um, it's probably because you're not engaging the total opportunity set within your business, right? Like you're missing something. You're missing something in your business that is tied to how you think about who your ideal client is, how you face up to your ideal client, what is the ultimate client solution. And yeah, I mean, those firms probably just aren't growing at the rates that the more thoughtful and progressive firms are growing at.
Yeah, I think there's plenty to unpack there, but before we do that, let's sit and define growing really quickly, because I think that's an interesting definition in this day and age in the financial advice industry, because many an advice firm would say they're growing through acquisition, but through speaking to you, I know that you have a firm belief on differentiating inorganic growth and organic growth. And there's a significant impact that plays on how you view a business. Can you elaborate on how you define that, and your views on inorganic versus organic?
Sure, absolutely. So obviously, inorganic growth or acquisitions is really effectively, in most cases, financial engineering, and it all sort of trickles down to your client acquisition costs and the lifetime value of the client, right? And I'm sure there's some really smart financial engineers that walk through those calculations, and we think about those things as well. And so it's sort of how I think about inorganic growth. Inorganic growth also can be and is an incredibly powerful tool. Uh, uh, and it's, I guess I would think about it as I think a lot of people think about inorganic growth as raising money, buying a business, and then integrating the business. And to me, that's about 25% of it, right? And so on the inorganic side, that balance, that extra 75%, becomes then how do I integrate the client? How do I ensure that the client stays? How do I make sure that I don't have a lot of attrition post transition? How do I make sure that I'm capturing all of the wallet share and the like? And so again, really good businesses that have the operational scale, the professional management, unique client experience, the marketing and branding, are in such a better position to acquire, because they're effectively hedging out a lot of the execution risk in making sure that when they buy a business, it stays, it grows, it thrives, which obviously improves your rate of return. So I think about organic growth, inorganic growth really should be done only by a subset of firms. But that's a bit of an opinion. On the organic side, the we talk a lot about organic growth, but we also have to understand the net number, right? And I'm always drilling into that net number, right? So you might be stacking the clients up on the top end, but you got massive attrition, right, coming out the bottom of the funnel. You might have an older client segmentation that's in distribution. So the organic piece is a little bit nuanced.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of our 2-part series with Matt Brinker of Merchant. Stay tuned next week where we'll further uncover the metrics that matter and how having a values-led client experience can impact these for business valuations. As always, hit the like and subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all our episodes, and thanks again for listening.